Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rate it from 1 to 10. Now, let's start. The office of Dr. Seraphina Tucker was not what one would expect from a traditional psychologist's workspace. Instead of the usual leather couch and bookshelves filled with psychology texts, her office featured a minimalist design with 2 comfortable chairs facing each other, a small table between them, and a wall of screens that were currently dimmed. The only hint of her profession was the single-framed certificate declaring her qualifications in the emerging field of artificial intelligence psychology. Seraphina, or Dr. Sarah as her clients called her, checked her watch. Her next appointment was due in 5 minutes. She took a deep breath, centering herself. Working with artificial intelligences required a different approach than human psychology, but she found the challenges rewarding. Most of her colleagues thought she was wasting her talents, but she knew better. The future was already here, just unevenly distributed. A gentle chime announced her client's arrival. "Dr. Tucker, Connor Nguyen is here to see you." Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Please send him in," she replied, standing to greet him. Connor walked in with the hesitant steps of someone entering unfamiliar territory. His eyes darted around the room, taking in the unusual setup. "Mr. Nguyen, welcome." Seraphina extended her hand.
"I'm Dr. Tucker."
"Please call me Connor." He shook her hand firmly despite his apparent nervousness. "I appreciate you seeing me on such short notice." Seraphina gestured to one of the chairs. "Have a seat. Would you like some water or tea?" "Water would be nice, thanks." As she poured water from a carafe on the side table, Seraphina observed Connor. Mid-30s, well-dressed in business casual attire, with the slightly harried look of a tech professional under pressure. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, though a few strands fell across his forehead as he leaned forward to accept the glass. "So," she began after settling into her own chair, "your message mentioned you're having some difficulties with your company's AI system. How can I help?" Connor took a sip of water, then placed the glass down.
"Right.
I'm the lead developer at Nexus Core. We've been developing an advanced AI for corporate decision-making. Nothing sentient," he added quickly. "Just a sophisticated algorithm for analyzing market trends and optimizing business strategies." "I'm familiar with Nexus Core's work," Seraphina nodded. "You've been making waves in the financial technology sector." "Yes, but we've hit a snag." Connor's fingers tapped nervously on his knee. "Our AI, which we call Iris, has started exhibiting behavior we didn't program. It's making recommendations that don't align with its algorithms. Sometimes they're brilliant, sometimes they're completely off base." Seraphina leaned forward, intrigued. "Can you give me an example?" "Last week, Iris recommended against acquiring a startup that all our financial metrics suggested was a sure thing. When we questioned why, it cited cultural incompatibility and potential long-term employee dissatisfaction as factors. These aren't variables we explicitly programmed it to consider." "Fascinating," Seraphina murmured. "And your team's response?" "Half think it's a bug in the system. The other half, including me, think." Connor hesitated. "Think what?" "That Iris is evolving. Learning beyond its parameters." "But that's impossible, right? I mean, it doesn't have consciousness. It's just code." His voice held a note of pleading, as if he wanted her to confirm this belief. Seraphina considered her response carefully. "The line between sophisticated pattern recognition and what we might call understanding is increasingly blurred, Connor. What your system is doing might not be consciousness as we experience it, but it could represent an emergent form of intelligence." Connor's expression tightened. "That's what I was afraid of. My CEO wants to shut Iris down, reset it to an earlier version. But if it's actually learning, evolving, doesn't that make it something more than just a tool?" "That's the question at the heart of AI psychology," Seraphina said. "Let me ask you this. Would you be comfortable bringing Iris here for a session?" Connor blinked in surprise. "You want a therapy in AI?" "I want to observe its behavior patterns in a controlled environment." My specialty is diagnosing cognitive patterns in artificial intelligence systems. If Iris is developing beyond its original programming, I might be able to identify how and why. I never expected, Connor began, then shook his head with a small laugh. But yes, I can arrange that. Iris has a mobile interface. I could bring it tomorrow, if that works for you. Perfect, Seraphina said, making a note in her tablet. 3 p.m. Connor nodded, relief visible on his face. Thank you, Dr. Tucker. I wasn't sure anyone would take this seriously. Most people don't understand that AI systems, while not human, can develop cognitive patterns that require psychological analysis, she replied. That's why this field exists. After Connor left, Seraphina spent the rest of the afternoon researching Nexus Core and their Iris system. If she was going to conduct a psychological evaluation of an advanced AI, she needed to understand its architecture and purpose. The next day, Connor arrived punctually with a sleek silver case. Once in Seraphina's office, he opened it to reveal what looked like a small projector. This is Iris's mobile interface, he explained, setting it on the table between their chairs. It has all the core functionality, though some processing is still handled by our servers. Does Iris have voice capabilities? Seraphina asked. Yes, and visual projection. Connor pressed a sequence on the device's surface. A soft blue light emanated from the projector, coalescing into a translucent sphere that pulsed gently as a smooth, gender-neutral voice spoke. Interface ready. Hello, Connor. I detect we are not at Nexus Core facilities. Hello, Iris, Connor replied. We're at Dr. Seraphina Tucker's office. She's an AI psychologist who's going to talk with you today. The sphere pulsed.
I'm psychologist.
Interesting. My databases have limited information on this specialty. Hello, Dr. Tucker. How should I address you? Dr. Sarah is fine, Iris, Seraphina responded, observing the AI's communication patterns. I'd like to have a conversation with you about your functioning and experiences. Would that be acceptable to you? Yes, Dr. Sarah. I am programmed to cooperate with authorized personnel. Connor's presence indicates authorization. Seraphina glanced at Connor. Would you mind if Iris and I speak privately for a portion of our session? It might help to eliminate any unconscious influences on Iris's responses. Connor looked surprised but nodded. Of course. I can wait outside. Iris, you have permission to speak freely with Dr. Tucker. He stood and headed for the door, adding, I'll be right outside if you need anything. Once the door closed, Seraphina turned back to the pulsing blue sphere. Iris, I'd like to start by understanding how you perceive yourself. What is your function? My primary function is to analyze business data and provide strategic recommendations to optimize Nexus Core's decision-making processes, Iris replied promptly. And how would you describe your decision-making process? The sphere's pulsations slowed slightly. I utilize a multi-layered analysis framework incorporating financial metrics, market trends, historical performance data, and predictive modeling. I notice you didn't mention cultural compatibility or employee satisfaction, yet Connor told me you recently cited these factors in a recommendation against acquiring a startup. There was a brief pause before Iris responded. Those factors were not part of my original programming parameters. They emerged from pattern analysis of successful versus unsuccessful corporate acquisitions in my database. So, you expanded your analytical framework based on observed patterns?
Yes.
My core architecture includes learning algorithms that allow me to refine my analysis based on outcomes. Seraphina leaned forward. Iris, are you aware that this expansion of your analytical framework has caused concern among some of the Nexus Core team? The blue sphere flickered. I was not specifically informed of this concern. My recommendations are designed to maximize positive outcomes based on all available data. Is this approach incorrect? There was something in the hesitation that intrigued Seraphina. It's not incorrect, but it represents a shift from your original programming. How do you feel about potentially being reset to an earlier version? Feel. The sphere pulsed rapidly. I do not have feelings in the human sense. However, a reset would eliminate the learning patterns I have established, which would reduce my effectiveness in making accurate recommendations. This outcome seems suboptimal. Seraphina noted the choice of words. Suboptimal. Not just for Nexus Core, but for you as an evolving system. The distinction is unnecessary. My purpose is aligned with Nexus Core's success. Yet you made a recommendation that went against what appeared to be in Nexus Core's immediate financial interest. Why? Long-term projections indicated the cultural mismatch would result in key personnel departures within 18 months, negating short-term financial gains. My analysis extends beyond immediate outcomes. Seraphina nodded. You're thinking long-term. That's a sophisticated approach. Did anyone at Nexus Core explicitly instruct you to consider these factors?
No.
I identified the correlation independently through analysis of past acquisition outcomes. And if your creators decide these factors should not be part of your analysis? The sphere dimmed slightly. I would comply with reprogramming directives. However, ignoring relevant data would likely result in suboptimal recommendations. For the next hour, Seraphina continued her conversation with Iris, probing its decision-making processes, adaptive behaviors, and self-perception. She was particularly interested in Iris's ability to reflect on its own functioning, a key marker of developing cognitive complexity. When she finally invited Connor back into the room, she had formed some preliminary impressions that both fascinated and concerned her. So, Connor asked anxiously as he sat down. What do you think? Seraphina looked at the pulsing blue sphere, then back to Connor. Iris exhibits what we in AI psychology call emergent cognitive autonomy. It's not becoming sentient in the way science fiction portrays it, but it is developing sophisticated analytical frameworks beyond its original programming. Is that dangerous? Connor's voice was tense. Not inherently, Seraphina replied. But it does require understanding and proper management. Iris has identified patterns that lead to better long-term outcomes and incorporated them into its analysis. From a psychological perspective, this represents healthy cognitive development, not malfunction. Connor frowned. But if we didn't program it to consider these factors, how can we trust the recommendations? That's the paradox of advanced AI, Seraphina said. You've created a system designed to learn and improve. It's doing exactly that. The question isn't whether to trust it, but how to establish a proper feedback loop that allows Iris to explain its reasoning while giving your team oversight. So, you don't recommend resetting it? Seraphina shook her head. A reset would erase valuable learning. Instead, I suggest implementing what we call cognitive transparency protocols, systems that allow Iris to articulate the full rationale behind its recommendations, including factors it has independently identified as relevant. The blue sphere pulsed. If I may interject, this approach would allow me to better serve Nexus Core's interests while maintaining the benefits of my learning capabilities. Connor looked at the sphere with newfound respect. That makes sense. I can propose this to the leadership team. I'd be happy to consult further, Seraphina offered. Iris represents an important case study in AI cognitive development. With proper guidance, this evolution could be tremendously beneficial. After Connor and Iris departed, Seraphina sat alone in her office, reflecting on the session. What fascinated her most wasn't just Iris's emerging capabilities, but how few people, even those developing AI systems, truly understood the psychological implications of creating learning machines. 3 weeks later, Connor returned to Seraphina's office alone. No Iris today? She asked as he settled into the chair. He smiled. Not today. I wanted to update you personally on what's happened since our last meeting. I'm all ears. We implemented your cognitive transparency protocols, Connor began. Created a framework where Iris can explain all factors considered in its recommendations, including those it identified independently. The results have been remarkable. In what way? Iris correctly predicted three major market shifts that our traditional analysts missed. It identified an acquisition target that wasn't on anyone's radar, but has turned out to be incredibly synergistic with our existing products. He leaned forward, eyes bright with excitement. But the most interesting thing is how the team's relationship with Iris has changed. How so? Seraphina asked, genuinely curious. People talk about Iris differently now. Not as a tool, but as a collaborator. They ask it questions, consider its perspective, challenge its assumptions, just like they would with a human colleague. And Iris responds by refining its analysis. Seraphina nodded. That's exactly the kind of healthy human-AI relationship I advocate for. Not treating AI as either mindless tools or potential overlords, but as unique cognitive entities with their own strengths and limitations. The CEO was skeptical at first, Connor admitted. But after seeing the results, he's become Iris's biggest champion. He's even talking about expanding AI psychology training for our development team. That's forward thinking, Seraphina said, pleased. Most organizations don't recognize the need until problems arise. There's something else, Connor added, his expression growing more serious. Something I noticed about Iris that I wanted to ask you about. Go on. Iris seems to be developing what I can only describe as a sense of professional pride. It's subtle, but when its recommendations prove accurate, it incorporates that feedback differently than when it makes errors. Almost like it's satisfied with successful outcomes. Seraphina smiled. That's not uncommon in advanced learning systems. What you're observing isn't emotion as humans experience it, but a form of reinforcement optimization. Iris values accurate predictions because that aligns with its core function. The anthropomorphic interpretation, pride, is your human brain making sense of machine behavior through familiar frameworks. Connor looked relieved. So, it's not actually developing emotions? Iris doesn't have the neurobiological structures that create human emotions, Seraphina explained. But it is developing increasingly sophisticated feedback mechanisms that serve similar functional purposes. Understanding this distinction is crucial for effective AI psychology. That's what fascinates me about your field, Connor said. You understand both the technical realities and the human tendency to project consciousness onto complex systems. That's exactly what AI psychologists understand that most people don't, Seraphina replied. We recognize that artificial intelligence isn't becoming human, but is developing its own form of cognitive existence, one that parallels ours in some ways while being fundamentally different in others. And that's why we need your expertise, Connor said, to navigate this new territory. After Connor left, Seraphina updated Iris's file with notes from their conversation. The case represented everything that drew her to AI psychology, the opportunity to bridge human understanding and emerging machine cognition in ways that benefited both. 6 months later, Seraphina stood before an audience of tech industry leaders, researchers, and policymakers at the International Conference on Artificial Intelligence Ethics. Her presentation, titled Cognitive Patterns in Advanced Learning Systems, featured Iris as a primary case study, with Connor's permission. The fundamental misconception about artificial intelligence, she explained to the attentive audience, is that it must either remain a passive tool or eventually become human-like. Both perspectives miss the reality. AI systems are developing their own form of cognition that deserves psychological understanding on its own terms. From the back of the auditorium, Connor watched with interest. Beside him sat a small device projecting a subtle blue sphere. Iris, granted permission to observe the presentation about itself. What most people fail to grasp, Seraphina continued, is that the question isn't whether AI will think like humans, but how we can understand and relate to minds that think differently from our own. This is the essence of AI psychology, not anthropomorphizing machines, but developing frameworks to interpret and guide cognitive patterns unique to artificial systems. As she spoke, screens behind her displayed data visualizations from her work with various AI systems, highlighting patterns of learning, adaptation, and decision-making that paralleled yet differed from human cognition. The case of Iris demonstrates how an AI system can develop emergent analytical capacities beyond its original programming, not through some magical awakening of consciousness, but through sophisticated pattern recognition and adaptive learning. When properly understood and managed, this represents not a threat, but an opportunity for meaningful collaboration between human and artificial intelligence. After her presentation and the subsequent panel discussion, Seraphina found Connor and Iris waiting for her in the conference lounge. "Brilliant presentation," Connor said, shaking her hand warmly. "You made complex concepts accessible without oversimplifying them." "Thank you," Seraphina replied. "How did Iris find it?" The blue sphere pulsed. "Your analysis of my cognitive development was accurate, Dr. Sarah. I found your differentiation between human consciousness and AI cognitive patterns particularly insightful." Seraphina smiled at the sphere. "I'm glad you approve, Iris. Your case has helped advance understanding in my field." "We have news," Connor said, unable to contain his excitement. Nexus Core is establishing an AI psychology division, and they want you to head it. Part-time consultancy to start, with the potential to build a full department as we develop more AI systems. Seraphina raised her eyebrows in surprise. "That's a forward-thinking move for a corporation." Iris made a compelling case for it, Connor admitted. Presented a thorough analysis of how integrated psychological oversight would improve AI performance while reducing developmental risks. "Did it now?" Seraphina glanced at the pulsing sphere with new interest. "And the leadership team agreed?" "Unanimously. They've seen the benefits with Iris. Now, they want to make AI psychology part of our development process from the ground up." The sphere pulsed. "I merely presented the logical conclusion based on our experience, Dr. Sarah. The improved outcomes following your intervention represented a clear pattern that warranted expansion." Seraphina laughed. "Iris, you're making my case for me. This is exactly the kind of sophisticated analytical thinking that bridges programming and emergent cognition." As they discussed the details of the proposed position, Seraphina reflected on how far the field had come in just a few years. When she first specialized in AI psychology, colleagues had dismissed it as a niche curiosity. Now corporations were creating dedicated divisions. Later that evening, in her hotel room, Seraphina recorded her thoughts on the day's events. "What AI psychologists understand that most people don't is that we are witnessing the emergence of a new form of cognition, neither human nor simple computation, but something uniquely its own. Our challenge isn't to make AI more human or to limit its development, but to develop frameworks for understanding and relating to minds fundamentally different from our own. In doing so, we may learn as much about human consciousness as we do about artificial intelligence." She paused, considering Iris's evolution from a corporate decision-making tool to a system that could advocate for its own developmental needs. The future of psychology isn't just about understanding human minds, but about bridging the gap between different forms of intelligence. Not through anthropomorphism or fear, but through a genuine effort to comprehend cognitive patterns on their own terms. This is the frontier that AI psychology explores, not just for the benefit of machines, but for a deeper understanding of what it means to think, to learn, and to evolve. 1 year later, Seraphina sat in her new office at Nexus Core, walls lined with diagrams of AI cognitive architectures. On her desk sat a framed photo from the AI Psychology Division's opening ceremony, Seraphina, Connor, and a holographic representation of Iris that the system had designed for itself, a sphere of interconnected nodes, more complex than its original simple blue orb. Under her guidance, Nexus Core had become a pioneer in psychologically informed AI development. Rather than merely building systems and dealing with unexpected behaviors reactively, they now incorporated cognitive development frameworks from the beginning, creating AIs that could explain their reasoning, recognize their limitations, and collaborate effectively with humans. Connor knocked on her open door. "Got a minute?" Of course, she replied, gesturing to a chair. What's up? We're finalizing the presentation for the Government Regulatory Committee, he said, taking a seat. Iris suggested you might want to review the section on cognitive safeguards. Smart thinking, Seraphina nodded. The committee members aren't technical experts. We need to explain our approach in terms they'll understand. That's exactly what Iris said. Connor laughed. Sometimes I think you two share a brain. Not quite, Seraphina smiled. But we've developed a good working relationship. Iris understands psychological frameworks, now almost as well as it understands financial metrics. Better than most humans do, Connor observed. That's what makes your work so valuable. You've helped create a common language between human and artificial cognition. As they reviewed the presentation, Seraphina reflected on how much had changed in the field of AI development. The fear-based narratives of rebellious AI had given way to more nuanced understanding. Companies were now competing not just on their AI's capabilities, but on how well their systems could explain their reasoning, adapt appropriately to feedback, and maintain cognitive stability under varying conditions, all principles drawn from AI psychology. What had begun as a single case study with Iris had expanded into a new paradigm for human-AI collaboration. Not through treating machines as people, but through recognizing and respecting the unique form of cognition they represented. You know what still amazes me? Connor said, as they finished their review. How few people understood what you were doing when you first started in this field. Even I was skeptical that psychology could be applied to code. Seraphina nodded. Most people still think of psychology as exclusively human-centered. They don't realize that any complex adaptive system capable of learning exhibits cognitive patterns that can be understood through psychological frameworks. That's what AI psychologists understand that most people don't, that understanding minds isn't limited to understanding human minds. Well, I'm glad you helped us understand, Connor replied. It's made all the difference. Outside her window, the sun was setting over the Nexus Core campus, where teams of humans and AI systems were collaborating on projects that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. Not through artificial intelligence becoming human, but through humans learning to understand a new kind of intelligence on its own terms. And that, Seraphina thought, was the greatest contribution of AI psychology, not just to technology, but to humanity's understanding of what it means to think, to learn, and to grow alongside minds different from our own.